Thank you, Superintendent. All right, Section 7 will be committee and staff reports. It's for workshop only. 7.1, in-county travel paid for the period of May 24 through June 6, 2018, presented by Ms. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.2, out-of-county travel paid for the period of May 24 through June 6, 2018, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. All right, the long one, consent agenda. 8.1, approval of consent agenda. 8.2, approval of the minutes of the workshop meeting of June 7, 2018. Minutes of the regular meeting of June 11, 2018, recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.3, appropriation of District 1 School Board Member Capital Outlay Funds to Meigs Middle School for cafeteria tables in the amount of $10,000, presented by Lamar White and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.4, request to advertise a public hearing for revision of School Board Policy 010-06, personal appearance before the board, presented by Mr. Jeff McInnes, attorney to the board, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
And board members, this is the policy you had asked me to bring back to you at this meeting, and so I have provided you a red line proposal, and certainly would be happy to discuss it or make revisions or to be sure this is what you intended when you were going to add a second area onto your agenda at each meeting to have public input. And you'll see that I've delineated those two periods of time and have put the 4 minutes for the first one, as is your current policy, and 2 minutes for the second one, as you had directed the other night.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. McInnes. 8.5, request to advertise a public hearing for the adoption of revised School Board Policy Chapter 4 students, presented by Mrs. Terry Schroeder, Program Director, Student Services, and recommended by the superintendent for approval.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Schroeder was not able to be here this morning, but I've been working with primarily she and Andy Johnson for a number of months trying to pull all this together. Chapter 4 is the chapter of your policy manual that deals with students in all kinds of areas. So therefore, there are multiple departments across the district that have policies in this chapter. They have all participated. They have all reviewed and edited. We hate to drop such a large policy on the board at one time, but this chapter has needed to be revised, and we're trying to get it done before the new school year would start. I think everybody is here today that could answer any questions that you may have about sections of it. These changes, as you'll see, some are just technical cleanup, some are citation cleanup, some are legislative changes. There is an entirely new policy in here for security of tests that needed to be adopted. There's an entirely new policy in here for prohibiting student hazing, which by legislation has to be adopted. And so that's the changes that you see. And we certainly can answer any questions you've got about any of these. We've done it in a red line form for you to try to make it easier to review and refer to.
Well, I see a number of guests in attendance. So, board members, any questions or comment about what our business is really about, Chapter 4, students?
I had a couple of things, and I mean, it is lengthy, and as you stated, it's one of the most important chapters in our board policy. So I'll be continuing to review them, before the board meeting Monday. And I know I've already received some responses from staff, so and I know I was emailing late last night, so I appreciate that quick response already. On 424 on student injuries. Again, since there are lots of revisions, I think this one, my only comment was the numbering. I think we're removing a couple of subsections, C and D, and so we need to reorder the lettering on policy 424.
Yes, maybe you're right. I just caught that.
And I think on that one, also, it referred to an MIS document, 5063. I'm sorry, I'm just going back and forth. And sometimes, I know in another policy later on that we do have for public hearing on Monday, we've attached the MIS document. in this case, we haven't, and if we're reviewing the policy to be updated or modified, I'd like to see a copy of that incident report in it, and I couldn't see it from a public standpoint on our documents. We don't have every MIS form on our documents and policies webpage. So if that could be included. And then I want to say, I can't remember, and Russ is here, so there was one, it might not have been this one, it might have referenced insurance, and it's probably casualty insurance, like if there is a student injury, would district insurance, it said, and I was just wondering if that could be clarified. I think that's in that policy under let's see, under section 4, it just said a copy would be sent to risk management if there's an accident, and then section G says an insurance report shall be prepared if an injury is covered by insurance. And there's lots of different insurances. There's health insurance, and so I thought if we were referring to a specific type of insurance, if that could be added in there. And if it's okay if I...
Sure.
Sorry.
I know you probably work with the attorney also independently to make some of these.
Right. And let's see, 424 was the main thing. Oh, playground, 426 is a policy about playgrounds. And again, I understand why we have our policies be relatively generic, but I was wondering if this policy was too generic in that, what are we defining as a playground? Is a playground a physical education field? Is it just for elementary students? Do we have a student to staff ratio that's required? I just had some questions about that policy. I'm sure it's driven by state statute.
And things like a ratio, we would typically, that would be an operational decision. If you lock it into this policy, then it's got to forever be done that way.
Right.
And we set ourselves up for claims if we don't do that. But we can look into the issue of playgrounds. I would suspect that would certainly be applicable to elementary schools, but I don't know whether the fields at middle schools are considered to be playgrounds or not. So.
Right, and we have tracks that secondary students walk around for physical education. So again, I just wanted some clarification on that statute as it pertained to playgrounds, if it was specific. And again, I'll, like Dr. White suggested, get with you on further questions. There was another policy, 428, on safety. And I didn't know if this is more of a social media, policy related, but staff or students sharing safety protocols on social media. I know that has arisen, when we have incidents at schools where we have, again, in that time of crisis, I know my own children are sending me messages, and if there's been any discussion within the district about when we send out notifications from a district level, we send out notifications to staff and to parents through, different measures, and if there's any need to look into that about the sharing of safety protocols. And I didn't know if we address that in another policy or if there's a need to address it in this safety policy.
We can talk about that. I think that would be a combination of both a communications element, which may be, once again, managed operationally. And I will tell the board that you may see some additional redlining by Monday night. There are a couple of other legislative issues that have popped up. There's several legislative issues in that safety area. And we've got to double check to see if any of those are going to require anything else here. And we're going to meet right after this workshop to look at those pieces of legislation. So, Mr. Usher, that may very well be taken care of in that review.
And you can do it again after they meet this session.
Right.
Exactly.
Anything else, Mr. Rush?
That's it for
Other-
now.
I
Yes,
just
sir,
have one
Mr.
comment. It is a long and complicated document, but we are, after all, only scheduling a public hearing, isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So it's going to get some more review, and I appreciate Mrs. Thrush's effort. It allows me to be a little lazy because she highlights things as she goes through that probably need to be highlighted, so thanks.
Okay, very good. All right, we'll move forward now to 8.6. Advertise a public hearing for the adoption of revised School Board Policy 12-02, Transported Students, presented by Mr. Jay McInnes, Program Director of Transportation, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Mr. Chairman, this policy is here. Ms. Thrush had asked us to look at this policy in light of an incident that had occurred in the North County, and it is basically just moving into board policy what has been practiced in using these bus passes, but clarifying and now making that a part of policy. The bus pass form has been rewritten, and so the changes here are intended to require that that be completed and properly delivered to the parties that need to have that information.
Of course, my comment would be that by putting it in policy, we're locking it in stone again, as we discussed on the earlier one. And I want to make sure there are no implications, and I'll get with Mr. McInnes to talk, that would affect other areas of our transportation and other students who are being transported.
Right. And I would tell you that when we went in to make the revision to section F, where that's contained, there were just some cleanups done to the policy while we were looking at it because it hadn't been addressed in some time. So the other things you see were cleanups to the policy, not changes to any material thing that we're doing.
Well, I know a little bit about bus passes. And so I guess the question I have is that, just for clarification purposes, would or must there be this form used to make a change in transportation? Do they have to use this form?
Well, what we would do is take this pass that we've revised back in the spring, and it basically has more detailed information on it now to help clarify where the student's going.
Right.
The pass would be used for new students that have just registered at the school,
Right.
a student that has a change of address, that's maybe moving to a new bus, students that may ride home with a friend, spend the night, etc. That's what the passes are used for.
Who fills it out?
From our perspective, the school fills it out.
Okay, so the parent sends the note, and then the school fills it out. And that's how we make the change.
I'm assuming the parent sends the note. The school
Somebody
handles that
does.
end of it, and then that information comes to us based on the pass that we've revised and given to the school to use.
And just out of personal experience, from the school standpoint, you know, if Susie wanted to bring home Jane for the afternoon after school, she can't just go up to school staff and say, well, you
Correct.
complete a bus pass and let Susie come home with me. So we do require parent permission in order to do that. To me, this form, which we were already using, like as you stated, but we've modified it to have more clarity and more detail on it. So I appreciate this effort because I think it will alleviate possibilities for miscommunication and makes people aware of
Right.
who's supposed to be on the bus and who isn't. The only question I had about the policy itself is it says MIS form, but it doesn't have the form number. And again, our other policies include the form number.
We can put that in there. However, Mr. McInnes wants to add that to it, I will get him the form number and we can put that in there.
And again, just for clarity, when we're modifying a policy, if it does reference a form, if it's possible to put that in our content just so that we can see the form, since it's also been, I've received a copy of it because I requested it from Jay, but if there's a way to include that when we make revisions to something.
And we certainly can do that. Matter of fact, Jan and I had a conversation about that because she had some MIS forms in the old chapter. They were there. We don't adopt the MIS form as part of the policy because sometimes we need to change those forms, and so we don't go through that whole advertising. But that's not a problem at all to provide them for y'all's information.
And then the only other question I had was kind of maybe what Dr. White was alluding to is, what is our, retention records for these forms? Like if a form, a bus transportation form gets filled out,
May I add?
how long do we retain that record?
And the parent note.
Right.
Because if we're going to be filling it out.
Dr. White's question, the policy does require that to initiate any of this, the parent must bring a written note or letter to the school.
And that's always been the case. We're not changing anything like that. So what is our, retention procedures? And
What we've asked the drivers to do is if they receive a copy of a note from the school, to give their area route coordinator a copy of that note either that day or the next morning. That way we have a copy of it for our records, and we will keep them, at least for a year during that school year.
That was the practice when I was doing that at 2 different schools. We kept the parent note, and we kept those notes for a year. And at the end of the school year, then some schools still kept them. They would put them in a folder and put them in a box and put bus notes. I know we did. And I think what you're asking is, do we know if we had to establish that the parent gave permission for that, do we have a mechanism to be sure that we follow that up? And that's something let us talk about that a little bit, because I have a couple ideas on that we might be able to do, Jay.
Okay.
And we're trying to go to electronic things now. So, Steve, this will probably be a question for you and your crew. All right, that's a good point, though. It's a very good point.
Well, I'm just hoping out of this policy, it's the consistency that we'll get.
Absolutely.
Because obviously schools were doing, not
And we
everybody
didn't
was
know.
following this. So, and that's what I'm excited about is the consistency, and then that way there's there's accountability. So.
And that's the main reason that Jay and I discussed having a uniformed way of documenting and reporting on this form. Every school had their own little thing that they were using. And so when Jay came to me and said, look, we've got to make this where everybody's doing the same thing and the same information is on every form. And so he worked on that and got that to us, and I agree. The consistency is what's important, because he showed me several different bus passes from several different schools, and everybody had different information. And it is not about what's easiest for the person who's filling it out. It's about us being able to track that and know. And so I appreciate those comments. And Jay has been very sensitive to that.
And we did get input from the principals at all levels, secondary and elementary, asking their input on the pass, things they would like to see and not like to see. And then we took all that, and I came to a principals meeting and talked to them about it and showed them what the end result was going to look like, and then tweaked it a little bit more. So we spent some time putting it together before we put it back out for use.
Well, with all this policies and everything else, maybe somebody will be smart enough to bring up a solution. For all the years I've been here, through several superintendents, maybe somebody can come up with a solution to figure out how we can be transporting a lot less, but I've never known it to change. Of all the thousands, we usually have at least 1,000 kids or more that we transport with under the 2-mile limit. Well, if anybody ever can come up with that, that'd be the most important policy we could figure out how to do, is all the kids that we all, and this is one of Miss Thrush's things that she's been concerned with since she's been on the board, is we all understand we underfunded with transportation, but no superintendent or board has ever been able to figure out a way to where we can transport less kids that we get not one dime for. And to me, all these policies is wonderful. But you know, the most important thing, if you go back and look, is we never decrease, we usually increase the number we transport, and we don't get a dime for it. Is that not true?
And I'm assuming you're referring to our policy of elementary students getting transported that live a mile from school?
Yes.
That's,
well,
yeah,
you know,
right.
You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, Jay. Huh?
But just for the general public, we're only funded to transport students of all ages that live beyond the 2-mile
Right.
mark from their zone school. But our school district has for years always transported elementary schools who live between the 1 to 2 mile
Right.
mark from their zoned school. The issue is that we don't receive funding for those students, but more importantly, for all the students that do live beyond the 2-mile mark, we're sorely underfunded, and we're only able to capture that twice a year. And I believe this past year it was 3.5 days in the fall that we had. And so even if your student rides the bus every day all year and they weren't at school that week that we submit numbers to the state, we don't get paid for that student. So there's probably many more of those students that we don't capture than even the 1 to 2 mile students. But I agree with Mr. Walker. I wish we could elect officials who would fund transportation for public education more appropriately.
We collect or have our FTE count 3 times a year, actually, October, February, and then there's a small one in the summertime for summer school, for ESY students only, not for regular ed students. But they did cut the time down to 5 days starting last fall, the state did. So instead of having 2 weeks to do it, as in the past, we now have 5 days to collect the data. So yes, it's probably going to affect us on the number of students that we actually can collect on when you cut the time frame down to only 5 days. So. Anything
Any
else?
other comments or questions, board members? All right, thank you, Mr. McKenna. All right, 8.7, budget amendment number 9, fiscal year 2017-2018, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.8, monthly financial statement for May 2018, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.9, invoices to be approved for payment, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.10, school donations, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, I know we're always grateful for all of the donations we receive, but again, thank you to the Children's Invitational Tournament that and their subsequent donation to Pryor Middle School.
That was a big one. All right, 8.11, payroll warrant register and accounts payable warrant register for May 2018, totaling $25,086,105.68, and bank transfers for May 2018 totaling $4,230,000, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.12, fiscal year 2017-2018, inventories from all schools and departments, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
After our agenda meeting on Monday, I did go back and review every one of these. And some of this is not uncommon. Rita tells me that we have every year some, I mean, when you have as many pieces of equipment as we do and it's being moved from room to room and place to place, sometimes things go missing. And I saw the letters from the principals where they're trying to locate this and what they're trying to do. But Rita, if you wouldn't mind, I know that every year we look at this, and every year there seems to be some things on there that we go, how do you lose that? But sometimes they forget to fill out the paperwork, and that's what they'll tell you in those letters. We forgot to fill out the proper paperwork and send it to finance to take it off the inventory. And it was surplus. They brought it up here and left it here. So, Rita.
And on the agenda item, you'll notice that that there are 3 attachments, but 2 of the attachments are missing items, and then the other one is missing other items. And so what happens is that, as the superintendent said, sometimes items either get surplused and the proper documentation was not filled out, or an item may get traded and the proper documentation was not filled out. So we've separated them to where if we can backtrack and we can find documentation of what happened to the asset, they're on the other list. And the way we go about that, for example, with a traded item on a purchase order where, let's say, a copier, you're buying a new copier, it'll be noted that you're trading the existing copier with the serial number, so that way we're able to track that. So if we can, we do. Now, the list that has that is missing items that are purely missing items that we cannot find documentation. That is the item that shows $10,000 and some few dollars. Just to put it in perspective, we have 45 schools and programs. We have 32 departments. We have 77 facilities or programs, and we have $363.7 million worth of assets. And the book value is $183.4 million, I believe. And out of that, we are missing $10,000. We would aspire to never lose anything, but the reality is that when you have that many facilities, that many people, and the number of pieces of equipment we have, sometimes that does happen. But schools are very diligent about trying to locate. We send district staff out to try to help them, and so in the bottom line, this is minuscule, and if you'll notice on the agenda item that that the loss is 0.06%. So again, we will strive to have a year that we never have an item missing. But I don't know if that's possible. But this inventory is very good, and if you go back and look at the last 10-15 years, our loss ratio has been very small. And again, probably what's listed as loss, there is a reason for it. But just like you'll see in the explanation, sent to surplus. But if I can't document that it went to surplus, sometimes we've even gone out to surplus and found the item, and then you can document it. But if I cannot find documentation, then it has to be listed as lost.
Well, Rita, unless they've changed, another thing so deceiving about this is the fact that we'll take an old copy machine sometimes. Well, it'll be totally worthless, but if you paid, let's say, $30,000 for it when you purchased it, then unfortunately, unless it's been changed and I'm not aware of it, that it's carried on your books as being worth $30,000 when it's not worth $5.
Right. Yes, sir.
That distorts a lot of times how that many times the media will pick up and say that you've lost $500,000 in equipment and inventory, when truthfully, if you look at it, most of it's totally worthless. And as Mary Beth said, just sometimes it's overlooked and the proper paperwork gets lost or something gets pushed back in a corner for 5 years and it's still carried on the books at a big value when it's totally worthless. Is that still the way you have to do it?
Yes, sir, that's correct, and that's why you see on the list in the attachments, you will see the original cost, you will see the depreciation, and you will see the book value. So, yes, and sometimes, you know, we've had things like you have a chair, you know, and it's some kind of special chair. It breaks, it only has 3 legs, someone doesn't think, they throw it in the dumpster because it's not repairable, but it's on our records as an asset, so therefore it wasn't disposed of with the proper paperwork, and that's what happens. So,
I have
any
one
other
more question for Rita. Rita, would this be a system that you feel would be a better system for our district if it was fully automated?
I mean, if it could be, if we could, I don't know that you can ever fully automate it, but if we could make advancements there, I'm sure it would help the schools. Because again, you know, if you could have just a scanner that could scan a piece of equipment that you're sending here, or sending to surplus, or you're sending to another school, that would certainly be a much more efficient and easier way for a school. Right now, I mean, it is antiquated, as you're saying, because they have to go fill out a form, they have to go pull a manual form, fill it out, they've got to send it to surplus, surplus sends us a copy. So yes, that would improve the process significantly, but again, all of those improvements are attached to dollars, and
They are.
We all know our funding situation. So that's why we have not moved forward on a system like that.
But I think it's something we need to have Steve and our tech guys look at. We've automated some things already. And I think if we can ever get to the point where we're doing that, it all feeds into one place. Maybe that computer person sits there and tells you where that old thing is going, then we can keep up with it much better. So Steve just loves it when I do this. He's sitting over there smiling at me, but it's important that we do this.
Well, I just have one question. Do you folks still send the commendation letters or letters of congratulations to those principals or department heads that are able to locate all of their equipment?
Yes, we do recognize them and send something to them.
So they get a letter. Very good. Very good. All right. Let's go ahead and move on now to 813. Medicaid School Administrative Claiming Agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and the School Board of Seminole County for fiscal year 2018-2019. Presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.14, agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County, Florida and Heartland Payment Solutions Incorporated for merchant services, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, I did want to thank Rita. She shared some information, I think, Ms. Crawford, and it's attached to the agenda. You know, anything that helps streamline our process, and in this case, credit card payments, so that parents and end users have one system versus multiple systems. I do want to reiterate that we still offer other options besides using credit cards for parents and families to make any kind of payments for lunches or other field trip purchases or anything like that. So it's not just credit cards, but this would allow us to streamline credit card purchases. My only question was, I know we're currently using this company for food services, but did we also look at other companies in addition to Heartland Solutions?
The company that food service uses, it's a sole source company.
Okay.
And that online payment system has to be used with food service in order for it to be real-time integrated
Okay.
into the system. Because, you know, now, like, if your child was at school and they called you and said, I don't have any lunch money, you could get on, send $10, and it immediately gives, posted their account, and they can have lunch. And so since that's a sole source, we tried to go with that company, because now we
Okay.
have the two, and the one that we're using for school internal funds is kind of cumbersome, and I don't think we're getting the full advantage that parents could get from that system. Plus, I believe it will improve work time and load for bookkeepers, because everything will be in one cart, so you'll be able to go for your student, pay for lunches, pay for yearbook, pay for a field trip, all in one cart. So I think just the ease and flexibility, and that will eliminate, like now, if, let's say they were selling T-shirts at a high school. Now, I mean, the bookkeeper has to go in there, and she has to set up a T-shirt, and she has to set up 4 different items for, you know, small, medium, large, extra large. With this system, you'll set up T-shirt, you go in there, has a drop-down menu, you pick the size, and so that eliminates 3, you know, items that a school's having to set up just to sell one item. So, and like you said, the schools can still take a manual check. The system will also let you accept electronic check, which is not available now. So this is for the convenience of the parent.
No, I agree. After I read the documentation you submitted, and the bookkeepers at our schools always amaze me to realize we have one bookkeeper, especially at our high schools with 2,000 students, and all that they are responsible for. I think it's a great opportunity, and again, like you said, it's a service that we make available. It's not a requirement that people use it, but it gives them another option.
Exactly, and I did note on the agenda item that the district does not derive any revenue from this service. It is purely for the convenience of the parent.
Thank you, Ms. Gallen. All right, 8.15, School Readiness Provider Contract, presented by Mrs. Gallen, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.16, Renewal of School Food Service Management Operations Contract for RFP 15-01, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Hang on, board members, we're about halfway now. 8.17, ITB 18-17, Session Initiated Protocol SIP, Trunk and Transport, presented by Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.18, ITB 18-20, Locksmith Services, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director, Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
How many bidders did we have on this?
We just had one bid response received, but this went out to 26 potential bidders, and 4 potential bidders downloaded documents. So there were 4 that actually grabbed the document off the system. Just a little history on this. We've never actually had a contract for this type of service for facilities. Is basically just, you know, handle call outs as needed. A lot of times after the fact, a lot of emergency type services for locks. So this is our first contract that we're trying to get approved for this type of service. But yeah, we sent it out to some local companies too, and this is we just had the one response.
And how long was the bidding process? How long was it for?
Our standard, I mean, the minimum is 14 days. I don't have the exact amount of days we had out, but it's minimum is 14 days.
And you said 4, at least 4 downloaded.
4 downloaded the document, right. And, you know, this contract, and Steve could tell you more about it, but it basically provides a fixed price list for all of the major services that would be required for locks. It also has some stipulations in there that would require, you know, this to happen in a timely manner, some things like that. Some companies may not want to, you know, sign on to things like that, but we have to have that type of service, in a school setting. We've got a locking situation, we've got to get that taken care of pretty quickly.
And again, this will help us standardize that service and standardize cost of those services and ensure that we do have time-sensitive labor show up to repair locks and services as needed.
Right, and we've got some clauses and some information here that that provides coverage for the services that we didn't have before. Basically, like I say, we're just a call out and get the service on the spot. But this, in addition to the fixed pricing for the line items, we've also got an hourly rate established too, and a discount for any type product that we would need, or any kind of anything basically that we would buy along with the service. We get a discount. It's going to be a 10% discount. We weren't getting that before. So
I'm familiar with the company. I've used them for years. They're a good company that does a good job. Just single bids. I wonder how it is we keep ending up with single bids on things.
Well, I mean, if 4 companies downloaded, they obviously looked at it, so,
right.
And they just chose not to put it in there.
That's
so.
right. And just to give you a little background too, on the kind of way, and Steve backing up on this, but there are basically just 2 companies here locally that we were, for the most part, using, and this was one of them. So, and the other company chose not to bid.
So I guess my biggest question would be just because we have school in Laurel Hill, we have school in Florosa Elementary, Destin Elementary. I mean, what is going to be? Is the response time going to be within
We've got some parameters written in there, and this was put out for, we could award it different ways. If we had more options, we could award it some different ways. But it was put out for a district-wide award. That was one of the options.
Seeing no further comment or question, Mr. Wyndham, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, 8.19, tag-on bid purchase over $25,000, Mohawk Resources LTD, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.20, tag-on bid purchases over $25,000, Polar King, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.21, tag-on bid ITB 18-B-071-NC bus cameras, accessories, and installation, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.22, exempted purchase over $25,000, Remsco, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.23, exempted purchase over $25,000, Corwin, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White, I know Ms. Gates is here, but, just to kind of go back to what Mrs. Jackson said at the beginning of the agenda in regards to training and preparation, the Corwin program is our leadership training for our administrators.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, 8.24, service agreement number 19-02, Art Monet Incorporated, DBA Abracadoodle, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.25, service agreement number 19-04, Kenneth Rhodes, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.26, service agreement number 19-05, Bryce Milton, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.27, service agreement number 19-06, Tyler Easterling, presented by Mr. Vince Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.28, modification of brokerage services agreement with FBMC Benefits Management, presented by Mr. Russ Frakes, Risk Management Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I had one question on that, Chairman.
Yes, sir. Welcome, Mr. Frakes.
Thank you.
Mr. Frakes, are we including other services in? What is this, the gist of this modification?
The modification frees up FBMC to do more in the procurement of business for the district, any piece of, and of course we're talking about employee benefits, that's what they do for us. So it would enable them a little more leverage, or excuse me, ability to go out and procure business for us, that whether it be through the competitive bid process. So it's just a little bit, frees them up a little bit over what we've been done previously. The BOG is still involved with any of those decisions that are made. Everything comes back to the BOG. Essentially, FBMC would be able to go out to the marketplace very quickly, turn around the bid process to get feedback from whether it be dental coverage or vision coverage, something along those lines. They would get information back from the market quickly, be able to bring it back to us, multiple bids, potentially spreadsheet that for us, present the information to the BOG, and allow the BOG to then make a decision quickly, and that would shorten the time frame that it takes us to do that process. If we go through as we've done previously, gone through the full RFP process, that takes a good deal of time to do. We would probably something like, and this is all to be established still, the actual how all the details about how that will come to pass, but the initial indication is that something along the lines of medical coverage would still go through a traditional RFP process, a bigger piece of business like that. But the ancillary lines of coverage, long-term disability, vision, dental, those are more commodities in this day and at this point in the marketplace. So it would give them some flexibility in getting those things to us more quickly.
So is there, in the document I saw something referring to a fee schedule. Is there going to be additional fees?
No,
associated
it's all
with this?
included in the flat fee that we pay, fee for service. So they include this. That's what they do for other clients. We've been looking at other districts and what they do, how they handle it. Mr. Wyndham, Mr. Miniganis, and myself have been looking into how other folks operate, and Ms. Scallon's been involved in those conversations as well. And we've gotten to the point now where we have a comfort level with how those other districts are operating under these rules, the state rules, and that this is something that could benefit us. But it is included in the fees that FBMC puts forward.
Okay, and the details that you say have not been worked out yet. Mm-hmm. By approving this, do we look at those details when they are in fact worked out, or are we just approving something we don't really understand?
Well, the detail, whether or not this agreement would apply, or the changes, the modification to the agreement would just simply give us the ability to, or give FBMC the ability to make that change. So how it comes to the BOG, all those sorts of issues would be worked out. I mean, we have a rough framework, but again, this is something that's you know, the key to allowing any of that to happen anyway.
Well, the only thing that gives me pause is it appears we're going to approve something that we really don't understand perhaps what it is. So, you know, I'll get with you between
Very
now
good.
and Monday.
Yeah, any questions you have about it, certainly happy to provide any answers for you.
Thanks.
All right.
Well, and I just have some questions.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. White, so just for those members who are watching and might not know what the BOG is, it's the Benefits Oversight Group.
Correct.
And so that group consists of district staff, and kind of in your discussion with Mr. Destin, my understanding of what's being proposed is that this gives FBMC the ability to, as you state, maybe go out and look at different vision policies that are available, come to the BOG and present those in a spreadsheet-like fashion, as you stated.
Certainly.
But that doesn't mean necessarily that the BOG has to choose from that. The BOG could determine
Absolutely.
that they want to continue the
Keep
way
going.
that
Right.
we have been doing things,
You're right.
and
You're
say,
correct.
no, we would rather put it out for an RFP.
You're correct.
Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
And the BOG maintains that control. And this would simply enable FBMC. They're a large organization. They have a lot of established relationships with carriers. They're able to operate a little more quickly than we could through an RFP process, where we're putting a bid out, waiting for those responses to come, and then working through that process as we typically have. It's a little bit cumbersome. This enables them to leverage those relationships that they have in the marketplace, negotiate with multiple providers potentially, and get us, the bottom line is to bring us the best deal possible. Bring us the best plan design, coverage, premium, all those combination of factors that go into it. But again, the ultimate decision is going to rest with the benefits oversight group. They'll make that recommendation to the superintendent, who then makes the recommendation to the board once approved.
Okay, and so again, I completely agree with Mr. Dustin about, making sure we understand the process.
Absolutely.
But the process that you're talking about that hasn't been clearly defined is more or less how FBMC will gather that information
they
and
have
options
shared-
and present it to
They have
the
shared,
BOG.
they have shared with us. This is something that they do as a matter of course for many of their clients. So they have a process in place. They have a package of documents that they send out, and they have shared those with us. So we have reviewed those. The only thing that would be worked out is, do we want them to provide us with, and it may vary depending upon the type of business that we're talking about. Do we want to see the top three contenders, or do we want to see all of the people that responded, depending upon how many there are? What exactly does the BOG want to see at the end of what they're going to bring back to us from the marketplace? In other words, those are the only things that may be in question to be worked out. But again, that could be something that we would do depending upon what type of business it was that we were seeking to bid.
But at the end of the day, as you state, the BOG would have full evaluation authority
Correct. That
and
will not
full
change.
decision-making
That's
authority.
correct. That's correct. It just frees them up and enables more reactive, quicker response time, really.
And I know I'm getting older, and each year seems to pass by more quickly, but if I remember correctly, it's been about a year since we switched over to using FBM.
That's right. It was August 1st of last year, so it's coming up on that anniversary.
And so do we have kind of an update? I know you've submitted out employee surveys and things like that. There
Sure.
were some concerns when we made that change, as any change, especially when it comes to employee benefits. So I know we're modifying the contract to
Right.
address this singular issue,
Right.
but have other issues come up that, we've been able to work through as we've made this transition to using them?
Yeah, just specifically with the brokerage side of things, I think their service has been very good. They've actually added an additional person to the team that they have at FBMC. They've been very reactive. They help us out in a lot of different ways. We have a lot of new capabilities that we haven't had previously. I can call either Lee or Barb and Vicki Whaley, who's been added to their team, and have them help us with whatever the case, whether it's from a problem that an employee may be having with a claim to some sort of a question regarding some technical aspect of our contract or of our policy with one of our providers, for instance. So. They've been very reactive, and I think they've done great. They've got a call center that we've never had that before. We don't take advantage of it quite as much as I'd like to see us do, but we will put that information out there and have that available as something that can help our employees. Somewhere they can go, they can call an 800 number and speak with a representative that has all of the information on our benefits and can assist and it kind of relieves some of the pressure of having to call risk management staff at a time where we get into open enrollment. Things are very busy there. It keeps the employee from having to wait to get a question answered, get something done. So.
Well, and again, any way we can communicate that. I know Mr. Bryant has at several board meetings said, our HR department is here to help you, and
Right.
oftentimes people don't know until there's a crisis situation or after the fact that,
Right.
I didn't
Could've,
realize I
should've,
had
sure.
this benefit available to me.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And we will be looking at, that's one of the things, communication strategy is one of the things that we're discussing with FBMC, and new ways that we can communicate. Some ways won't change, but we'll as many avenues as possible to get the word out, because it is difficult to get a message like insurance out to everybody and have them be open to that through just simply email. There's this email traffic. Get a little inundated at times in an organization like this. So, but we will certainly make take a multi-pronged approach to that communication strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Frakes.
All right,
And
thank you.
Mr. McInnes, I can't remember if you were on the approval tree for this, but because this is a contract modification, I'm wondering if you might just take a look at it, or
I wrote it, so.
that might be better than looking at it.
Yes, sir. And
I guess we'll find out.
I would only add in that
I hope it's not in court.
the board remember that using brokerage services is a new thing for our district, and like Ms. Thrush said, it's only about a year old. this amendment is only recommended because we have determined and discovered that there were some additional services for the same fees that this company could provide, that in fact they are routinely providing to other school districts that are their clients. We didn't have in the original contract the authority for them to even get into the area of doing any competitive solicitation for the district. But as you'll see in that language, it's at the request of the district. They don't have any authority to initiate any of this unless the district goes to them and asks them to do it. But now their contract, if you approve it, would allow them to assist us with that for the same rate, same fees.
Yeah, and I think Russ made it clear that, and that was my concern. They recommended the BOG recommends the superintendent, and she recommends us, so we're all still in the loop.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That is unchanged. All right.
All right, now, thank you, Mr. Frakes. All right, moving on, 8.29, renewal of Florida School Board's Insurance Trust membership and property and casualty insurance program presented by Mr. Russ Frakes, Risk Management Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
All right. Just wanted to give a little bit of background, and actually before I even get into that, I'll say that our FSBIT, the Florida School Board's Insurance Trust, has sent over some of their staff, and I would just quickly introduce them. Scott Blazer, who's the director, he leads the claim staff as well as the loss control staff. We have our adjuster, Miss Shelley Cook. I speak with her on a daily basis, multiple times a day. She works very hard for us, helps out she's the workers' compensation adjuster, so she helps all of our employees that have, unfortunately, are injured on the job. Then we have Tracy Wade. She does the loss control stuff. She's a safety person through and through, helps us a good deal. And then Jill Thompson, who is their IT person, and she is a whiz on the origami system and helps me a great deal. I keep going back to her for things, so we'll get into a little bit of the things that she helps us with here pretty shortly. So with that, I wanted to give a little bit of just, I got some slides, and I've passed out some presentations here for you. Some of the things we'll go over here briefly. But just a couple of quick words about the market in general and just what's going on with it. The insurance market is starting to harden. There's been about 17 quarters in a row where renewals have decreased. So what would be termed as a soft market, a period of decreasing prices. That's starting to come out of that now. We've seen about, of course, you don't need to go very far, but look in the news to see that we've had about $100 million, actually more than million. We've had over $100 billion in insured losses related to catastrophic events in the past several months, past year, claims year. So all of that, even though there is capital available in the market, that is constrained by all the catastrophic losses that we've seen. So you see, as you can see here, just some of the different sectors of the industry: commercial auto, general liability, workers' compensation is the one that still remains a little soft, but you're seeing increasing prices in a lot of those areas. There's also a benchmark that I provided here with some other accounts that some information that Willis Pooling shared with us. They are the broker for Florida School Board's Insurance Trust. And some of those accounts in similar size. FSBIT's about a $5 billion piece of business all together with the 11 member districts. Their total insured values. So you see that we're in here in that pretty close to some of these other risks that are, and you're seeing 20 and 25% increases on some of those other pieces of business. Fortunately, FSBIT, as you see here with some of the renewal details that we're looking at on the property side, FSBIT had there was a 10% rate cap that helped to offset some of that potential market increase that you might see. There's a couple of things that are operating here that are at play, and I just wanted to share with you some of the developments that have happened in the past year with the trust. One of the things is that the property loss fund, and that's an amount of money that is set aside to pay the losses of the members of the trust. It is a pool of money. Each member of the trust contributes to that pool of money, and then claims are paid from that. And as the trend has been over the past 3 years, we've seen that loss fund has been outpaced by the total incurred losses. Now, total incurred losses in insurance speak, that means direct losses that you pay, but also losses that you may be required to pay in the future. So you can see you have to reserve that amount of money to pay in order to pay those claims. So a workers' compensation claim may represent a string of payments that can continue for many years. So you have to reserve that amount of money. So you've seen that we see here that our total losses are exceeding the property loss fund. So the board, the members of the trust voted to increase the funding level from 1 penny per $100 of value to 1 1/4 pennies per $100 of value here in this most recent year. So that property loss funding has been increased to bolster that amount of money in order to be able to pay those losses and set those figures a little more in line with one another. On the casualty side, and property, that's property. So for the district, anything, our buildings, any contents items, all of our vehicles would be on the property side. The casualty side would be everything else, the things you can't see. So our workers' compensation claims, for instance, anything that the district may become liable for. So the biggest development there is a pricing allocation change, and that allocation model is just simply the formula that's used to apportion the premiums and the administrative costs between the member districts. There's a great disparity between the size of some of the districts. You've got Okaloosa County, Santa Rosa, Alachua, and St. Johns County, they're on the larger side, and then we've got Lafayette County, who's a very small county. So certainly the premium is going to be apportioned to those in a different way. They're not going to pay the same premium that some of the bigger districts are going to pay. So the previous model was apportioned based on losses and exposure. So losses being a 5-year rolling average. You would average your losses for your district for 5 years, and then that would be 70% of the allocation. The other would be based on exposure. And exposure is comprised of 3 different areas: the number of vehicles, the number of your average daily attendance, and the amount of payroll. Those figures all kind of dictate exposure in different manners. So the mix of those two is how that premium was apportioned, and the administrative costs. Some of the members felt that was too reactive to changes in their losses. So if you had a good year fall off of your 5-year average and a bad year come on, you would see a dramatic increase in your change in your premium. So they elected to go to a new model that would base it more on the exposure side of the equation. So it's just simply rate times exposure to determine what your premium, the allocation for your premium is. And the same thing was applied to the administrative costs. The objective of that is to decrease the volatility, like I said, and then allocate the fixed costs based on a direct percentage of their total exposures. And the administrative costs being the FSBIT and Willis fees. I've also provided I know I spoke with Dr. White earlier in the week, and he had some questions about some of the property coverages, what some of those coverages were, what they entailed. So I had some of that information here just to provide a brief summary on what those items are. See, we've got the property coverages, again, the coverage on the buildings. The property loss fund is that pool of money that's available to pay property losses. So when we're paying that, it's different than we've done previously. When we started with FSBIT, we set that money aside. We're no longer writing those checks on a as-we-go basis as we were in the past. We're not sending over requests to finance to cut a check because FSBIT is writing those checks for us whenever losses occur. Whenever we have workers' compensation claims, those bills come to FSBIT. They adjust them, fee schedule them, and they're writing those checks. That money is coming from from that loss fund. In the case of workers' compensation claim, it would come from the casualty loss fund. But we're essentially prepaying those losses, those expected losses in the court at the beginning of the year. We've got just to run down that list real quickly again, and I would highlight, we'll go over all of them, but one that I would highlight is the special contingency risk. That's something that FSBIT has purchased for several years. Many school districts around the country are now scrambling to get this coverage in light of recent developments with different school shootings around the country. That's something that we got last year when we started as full members with the district, so we have that now, and that's to explain to you what that is. Essentially, it's a modified kidnap and ransom policy, and it would provide coverage. It would answer in the case that you had any sort of an event on campus that involved a weapon. It would also answer in the case of any sort of a child gone missing, that sort of thing. It pays for investigation fees. It had it did pay, unfortunately, in one case within the within the trust recently where there was an unfortunate on-campus suicide, so it provided counseling. It was able to put counselors in the school very quickly. So we have that policy in place, and that's something that's fairly unique. But like I said, it's becoming much more prevalent now, and a lot of different school districts are looking at adding that coverage, and we have that in place and have had since last year. So we've got here the pollution, legal liability, cyber liability. That's something that we also got last year when we did not have previously, that we got when we joined as full members. So we have some coverage there. You don't need to look too far in the newspaper to see issues with cyber attacks. School districts are being targeted. So it's great to have that layer of protection for us in place. So we have a full, pretty full array of policies in place now as full members. I would share with you, and of course the premiums have already been included, and I did include them as reference in the back of the presentation there as well. But I did want to share some of the things, highlight some of the issues, and some of the trainings that have been done by FSBIT staff over the course of this first year with them. Scott came over beginning of last school year, and we looked at, actually sat with our bus shop staff and trained all of them. What we found is that our bus shop foremen typically were reporting to the scenes of bus accidents, and certainly their first priority is making sure that the students and our employees are safe, that our equipment is protected. But one of the things that they were also doing is they were taking photos of the losses. And we saw a lot of, we could tell it was a red car because we were about that far away from the vehicle when we took the picture. So we got great pictures of the damage, but we couldn't really see the whole scene. So we did a class with them and explained to them in just a very few brief pointers on their information gathering while they're at the loss scene, and got a lot better photos as a result. Just a very quick, it was probably a 30-45 minute class that we went through with them, and we started getting much better results. We're seeing the scene, seeing the roadway where it took place, what the conditions were, the other vehicle, the types of vehicles, how the vehicles were set, skid marks, those sorts of things. All of that very helpful as we proceed through an investigation to determine whether the school district was liable, and informs our position and what our stance is going to be as we approach a claim. We also met with all of the bus drivers. It was great to have them all in one room at one time. We took advantage of that. Mr. McInnes, Jay McInnes, allowed us to come in and speak with them, and Scott again made a defensive driving presentation that was very well received, and we're hopeful to be able to continue that and continue doing trainings with our bus driving staff. It's very important. We'd also implemented a Safe Schools online training database. This is a product that Florida School Board's Insurance Trust obtained and gives all its member districts access to, and it is a library of videos that can be used. You can create custom videos, which we've done, that can be used to all manner of training, whether it be from your custodial staff to bus drivers to teachers, administrators. So we're going to start using that. We've implemented it. We've got that set up, and we will start using that. We've matter of fact, met just this week with Miss Maxey and Brandy Hand, and we'll start that process here at our beginning year training, doing some of our trainings that are required, and it enables you to document the training that you've done. You make an assignment to an employee or a group of employees, and they go on an online database and are able to pull out these videos, watch the videos that have been assigned to them, take a quiz if you require it, and then it's documents that they've in fact completed that training. So we'll be making more use of that here as we go. We also were able to work with Shelley to refine our reinstatement request process for our workers' compensation claims. We've developed a form to do that now. The information was a little bit all over the map. It depended on who was providing the information as to what you got. Now we've kind of standardized that to some degree and kind of smoothed that process out a little bit. Helps communicate between payroll, the school, the bookkeeper, and Shelley and of course risk management staff as to what exactly is going on with an individual whenever they've missed time as a result of a workers' compensation claim. One of the big things is our runoff claims. Those are claims that we brought into FSBIT that occurred before 7/1 of 17. We started with 156 of those, and we're now down to 59. So those claims many of them are quite old, and represent a stream of payments that the district must make on those older claims. So we're trying to shut down as many of those as we can, and get that down to just the bare minimum as we possibly can. There's some claims on there that are quite old, that workers' compensation claims that we're required to pay that go back almost to when I was in high school. So they're go back well into the 90s and even the 80s. So we're working to reduce those. And one of the biggest things here is one of the biggest drivers of cost for workers' compensation are lost time claims. That's when somebody is injured to the point that they are unable to work. The doctor has placed them off work. We've looked at our lost time claims and see that previously we looked at in about the past 3 year, I think I did 3 or 4 year average there. We're right at about $8,500 per lost time claim. That's come down now to $2,700, almost $2,800 there per lost time claim. So a big improvement there, and that's just a reduction in severity. And that's one of the things that we've focused on with FSBIT is reducing the severity of our claims, the amount of money that we're paying on a per claim basis. Shelley worked very hard in looking at our files, doing a file reviewing all of our files, and was able to do make some moves on several of our claims here. You see I kind of summarized those here with these 20 claims that she looked at and did a number of things. She either would close down a nurse case manager if it wasn't warranted. That's an expense, an extra expense that's involved that she did away with and was able to handle herself, or with some assistance from the on-staff nurse case manager at FSBIT, or just a change in care. Whether it was a surgery that it may have been authorized that she looked at, took a second look at, got some additional medical opinion, and was able to find an alternative to the surgery that had been recommended, or recovery of overpayments, any claim that had not been administered properly as far as payments of indemnity claims. She was able to go back and recover some of those monies that had been overpaid, and almost $400,000 in savings were recouped as a result of her efforts. So that with that, what we're doing in year 2 is going to be we're looking at frequency, focusing on frequency, reducing the number of claims that we see on an annual basis. That's going to involve creating a culture of safety within the district. One of the things that I've worked with Jill is creating some reports that will be used, and she comes to me, brings me something. I say, well, let's do this, and I use the term. I want this to be like a USA Today. I want people to be able to look at it, because this is something we're going to roll out to principals and have principals be able to look at what's going on in their school and be able to see visually and quickly tell how they're trending. What areas are problems for them at their school? What can they focus on in order to help reduce these claims? So that's something that we'll be introducing to them here in short order. We will continue with additional implementation of a safety plan. Tracy Wade is assisting with this, something she's got some experience with. So we have a draft of that out now. We will refine that, implement it, and bring it to the board. And adopt that, and that will help us in a couple of different ways. Of course, it outlines all things safety in the district, but also provides us with a credit on fees that we must pay to the Division of Workers' Compensation. We get a credit for that, just like you would see a discount on an auto policy for a good student discount or something along those lines. So acts similarly here. So that'll be an additional benefit to the district. We'll expand our safe schools training. Again, I said we just met with HR staff, so we'll get that going here as we approach it. And of course, we'll continue to reduce our runoff claims and train the custodial staff and transportation. There's also some targeted efforts. FSBIT has a lot of good ideas. Some schools that, based on data analysis, have shown some issues with some particular schools. Those will be some targeted trainings and efforts that will be made in order to reduce those and further reduce the number of claims that we're seeing. Further, FSBIT's offered support with other areas. SREF inspections, playground inspections. We actually got an email from a principal yesterday that they wanted to purchase some playground equipment. So Tracy was able to take a look at it and said, I'll render my opinion and let you know what I think and give some guidance to this principal that's needing some guidance. So, but she can also do inspections and help out greatly with that, as well as the Safe Schools Assessment Tool. It sounds like, from speaking with Mr. Koutsaratos before, it sounds like that's pretty well in hand, but they're there and willing to able to support us in a lot of different areas that touch safety and security. With that, I think I've just got some reference information in there, but that should do it. Any questions about the renewal itself?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that stands out, and again, I appreciate all the efforts under, again, another new system for the district. As you stated, about a year since we've been fully under FSBIT. The fee increases, you know, as you kind of alluded to, there's different reasons and causes for that, and changes to the way we're calculating those risks and thus those fees. But are there any plans for, or how are we monitoring or going forward going to monitor assessment of fees and, you know, controlling fee increases as much as we can?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to come down to the experience that we have, you know, our ability to further reduce our severity, reduce that, you know, we'll see, I think we'll see reductions in like I said, we focused on that, the severity, but I think reductions in frequency will be forthcoming. So I think we'll further kind of push those numbers down. So I think that's what we'll look to as far as a strategy of controlling those costs.
And, you know, just establishing goals, whether, you know, you mentioned targeted training maybe at schools, and,
correct,
you know, just as we might reward schools, even if it's just a letter of accolade, you know, for 100% inventory, the same thing about lost work time incidents and things like that, so that we can have targeted measurable goals to compare against.
Yes, we have that ability now with the Origami. The risk management information system provides us with a lot of metrics that we've not had previously. So, yes, that is certainly possible to do that.
And, you know, and being the representative for our district on that board, you know, the first year going to the couple of meetings I went to, it was really hard to gauge because we didn't have, since we were the newest one, we didn't have all the information to us. But what's exciting is going to see what the second year is going to bring, because then we'll be able to start comparing.
Right.
And then the one thing I really love about FSBIT is the emphasis on, you know, controlling and educating our employees on working safely. There's a lot of opportunities for us to take advantage of that FSBIT has to offer. I mean, like you said, Scott came up and did some training, but there is a lot of great tools out there that I think once we fully get behind it, we're going to see some great savings. We're going to see some improved working conditions and things like that, which to me is very important. I think
absolutely.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Fraser.
you.
Good job. All right. So let's move on now to 8.30. Sale and disposal of fish parcel 65, presented by Dr. Bill Smith, Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Mr. Chairman, this is the board approved a resolution at the last meeting that surplus this particular parcel in Baker and authorized Dr. Smith to request a survey from DOE. DOE has approved the surplus and disposal. And so what's before you for consideration for Monday night is a resolution that will approve a contract to sell that property to the Baker Water System, Inc. The price for the purchase is $48,000, which is the appraised value. There is a written appraisal that's been received by the district. The purchaser has approved the contract and returned it signed, and so now it's just awaiting the board's approval Monday night if you want to move forward with that purchase. So everything right now is contingent upon your final consent.
Well, that's good. Thank you, Mr. McInnes. All right, seeing no comment, we'll just move on. 8.31, contract agreement between Panhandle Area Educational Consortium and the School Board of Okaloosa County, presented by Mrs. Christy Corbin, Assistant Principal, Okaloosa Online, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.32, virtual instruction on provider agreement between Edgenuity Incorporated and the School Board of Okaloosa County, Florida, presented by Mrs. Christy Corbin, Assistant Principal, Okaloosa Online, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna, I know Ms. Corbin's here, and again, we're required by statute to offer so many opportunities. Mr. Horton's showing his 3 fingers, and I didn't want to say 3 in case I was incorrect. But that has changed since an online requirement was added to high school students' graduation requirement. But this is also giving options to students who, for various reasons, can't attend a regular school setting as well. But I appreciate, all of these efforts, but it does take a lot of coordination. And then I'm sure you track, Ms. Corbin, how many students we have participating in each different service that we contract with. And I mean, out of curiosity,
with PAEC, this year we tried something new. We were trying to recoup some of our homeschool students that go under Miss Kitchen. We were trying something this year to see if we could get some money back into the district. It was about 50-50, and we had to have some baseline numbers. So that's something myself and Mr. Horton's going to look at and see if that's something we need to go forward with, or we just need to, hold off on that. But with the PAEC contract, if students in the district do not wish to take a course through Edgenuity, they'd rather do it through Florida Virtual, this is the contract that we use for that situation. Okay. We had probably through the PAEC roughly about maybe 150 completions, somewhere in that neighborhood, because most students go through Edgenuity. Okay. With Edgenuity, we were rounding about anywhere from 200 250 completions a month. This last month we had over 1,000, so it just kind of depends on what time of the year it is. December and January, we were pretty close to 1,000 during that time. So it depends on the month. Usually at the end of the semesters we see a huge increase. Summers are pretty busy too, because these kids are doing credit recovery. The ones that cannot attend summer school, they do it online during the summer. Okay. And the K-12 contract, usually around 50 to 60 students in that contract every year, mostly elementary.
Okay, so we've been kind of steady over the years since we've been contracting with them.
K-12 is increasing a little bit on the elementary side, just simply because of everything that's happening in the nation, basically in a nutshell. Parents are a little apprehensive about sending their babies to school, so they would rather keep them at home because they feel safer that way.
Well, I appreciate the question, and I'm asking perhaps at some juncture you could give us just a kind of a little thumbnail sketch about how many children are enrolled in the different programs and that I guess your office is required to oversee, so that we'd have some idea of participation in these programs. And I appreciate the question, Ms. Thrush, and I know you weren't necessarily prepared for that, but maybe at a later time you might could provide that to the board members.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Corbin. All right. 8.33, agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Calvert Education Services, LLC, for online educational products, presented by, again, Mrs. Christy Corbin, Assistant Principal, Okaloosa Online, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.34, contract between the School Board of Okaloosa County and K-12 Florida, LLC, for Fuel Ed online educational products, presented by Mrs. Christy Corbin, Assistant Principal, Okaloosa Online, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.35, exempted purchase PSA Healthcare, presented by Mrs. Terry Schroeder, Program Director, Student Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Dr. White?
Yes, sir.
I know Ms. Schroeder's not here, but Ms. Bobby Davis is here. And I just wanted to commend her. I've known Ms. Davis for many years, and she's been a great partner with the school district. And I just wanted you just kind of fill us in, if you don't mind. I know, just like anywhere else in the private sector, trying to fill these positions, how are we looking moving forward? Do you feel?
Right now, we're at 4 positions that we're looking to fill for next school year, so we had a great retention this year. Right. So we'll hopefully have them filled within the next couple weeks.
Okay. And again, I just want to say thank you, Ms. Davis, for all that you do. Like I said, PSA has been a great partner with Okaloosa County School District.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
And we thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. All right. 8.36, Educational Services Agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Okaloosa Academy Incorporated to provide services to students placed at the Department of Juvenile Justice in Okaloosa County, presented by Ms. Terry Schroeder, Program Director, Student Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. I see Mr. Sansom.
Right, I know Mr. Sansom's here, so again, these are students who need to get educated, and they have this opportunity. And in the past, we haven't been able to provide students with opportunities, and it's really important that students have themselves in various situations, you know, continue to pursue an education. So glad that they have this opportunity and for working with us and Mr. Johnson in placement of students, and certainly with behavioral and mental health issues that we've already discussed that have been in the forefront recently, and working to get these students the services that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. Thank you, Mr. Sampson. All right, moving on. And, you know, I know this is a long agenda, but I think you folks told me that last year this time there were 65.
Even longer.
65 items on consent because of the time of year. Right. We're having to get everything in place for the new year, new school year. 8.37, Memorandum of Understanding between the School Board of Okaloosa County, Okaloosa Academy Incorporated, and Home Builders Institute to provide services to students placed with the Department of Juvenile Justice in Okaloosa County, presented by Mrs. Terry Schroeder, Program Director, Student Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And again, I would just comment that I'm grateful for any opportunities that any institutes, organizations, businesses can provide to give these students any kind of training that will help them upon their release, or you know, get them out into the workforce, or an ability to further their education. So I'm happy to see us trying to reach out and partner with different programs to provide them with some kind of skill set.
Okay. 8.38, Cooperative Agreement between the School Board of Okaloosa County and the Early Learning Coalition of the Emerald Coast for Child Care Services, provided to the Teenage Parent Program, presented by Mrs. Terry Schroeder, Program Director for Student Services, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And I just wanted to thank Ms. Schroeder and our TAP coordinator. We made some changes in recent years to our TAP program, and again, it's so important that young parents still have the opportunity to receive their education. So I know our coordinator has worked really hard with these students, and certainly our local daycare providers working to make child care placement available so that they can continue their education.
Thank you. 8.39, Title I, Part A, Florida Department of Education Project Application for 2018-2019, presented by Ms. Amy Dell, Title I, 9 Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And I know Amy's here, and I didn't get, this is such a big agenda, so I didn't get to contact you. I know this is an important federal grant. Just like we've seen reductions in budgets, and then if I understand correctly, you know, the recent legislation from the Florida legislature has impacted our Title I funds. So can you kind of summarize what we won't be able to provide because of legislative, if you will, taking over of these federal funds?
Our allocation is a preliminary allocation. What I've sent to you also includes an estimated roll forward. Last year with HB 7069, we had to add 4 middle schools. So with poverty increasing in Okaloosa County, as well as increasing the number of schools, our funding is not increasing. So in turn, that's sending less funds to each of our schools. And with that, then we have to do some, you know, making adjustments within our budgets. and 8% will be held at the district level. The rest of the funds are pushed into the schools and then they create their budget worksheets from that.
And just so the general public understands, a quote-unquote Title I school, can you explain what that means?
Yes. Title I schools are schools in here in Okaloosa County that have 50% or greater free and reduced lunch populations. So these students are students that may not have had opportunities for early childhood education before they came to school due to financial restraints, and the Title I funds are pushed into the school to allow us to provide more support to those students in order to, I don't want to use the word catch them up, but help them have the foundational skills
to
that
supplement,
they need. Yes.
Right, their educational experience. And just, again, you stated that we have an increase in poverty in our area, and all of our elementary schools in the South Zone, except for Destin Elementary, are Title I schools. All of our elementary schools in the North End are Title I schools, except for Antioch, if I'm correct.
That is correct.
And the Central Zone is the only zone that doesn't have an elementary school, or is
Lewis. Lewis Elementary is Title I.
Part of Lewis is Title I now. So, and even for people attending Eglin Elementary School, whose parents by default have to have the ability to access space, so they have a job with the government. And I don't remember Eglin's numbers, but I believe it's a quarter at least.
Yes.
A quarter of those students qualify for free and reduced lunch. So these are working families.
Yes. As you stated, with just Destin Elementary in the South End, what's happening now is if that many schools, elementary or Title I, they're now going into middle schools, and it's impacting our middle schools. And it is working families. You brought up Eglin Elementary. They are not a Title I school,
Right.
But they do have over a quarter of their population on free and reduced lunch status. I'm meeting with Eglin Elementary actually next week and working on a partnership so that we can help all of our military students, because many of our military families do qualify. It's only their taxable income that is used to decide if they qualify or not. And so the military is reaching out to us and wants to partner with us to provide more services and supplement for those children.
And I know working in conjunction with food service and different partners in our community to make that free and reduced application available, because if they fill out that application, then it makes us able to provide their students with resources that we couldn't provide without receiving that funding. And as you stated, 92% of that funding is going out to those schools.
Yes, correct. We provide it electronically, as well as the schools have requested paper, because when we're working with disadvantaged families, they may not have access to a computer, and coming into the school is a stigma for the families. So we are actually providing more paper copies now for them from food services.
And we've kind of described our elementary school schools that are Title I, and you mentioned 4 middle schools that are now designated Title I. So I know Pryor, up in the North End.
Would be Laurel Hill 6-8,
Okay.
Bruner, and Silver Sand 6-8.
Okay.
And so one of the things that always caused me some concern, and there maybe is a way that we ameliorate this in some way now, but as I remember, there might be a case of a child in poverty that because they attend a Chapter 1 school, they might receive additional assistance because it's Chapter 1. But another child, equally in poverty, because they attend a school that's not in Chapter 1, they don't receive any of those services.
Well, in Okaloosa County and all of our elementary schools, we do provide remediation classes, whether it's a title school or non-title school. The funding that our title school receives allows them to provide supplemental and hire more personnel than, say, the non-title. But our students, regardless of their school, are receiving extra services if needed.
Whereas if they attended a Title I school, they would receive those extra benefits, I think, that you alluded to in terms of funding.
Their school receives extra funds, yes,
Right.
to supplement.
Exactly. And that's the fallacy of the program. I understand that.
Interesting concept that if you're not going to the right school, you don't get the benefits, even though you qualify.
You don't get all of them.
Don't get all of them, yeah.
Yes, but again, our non-title schools as well, they're recognizing the changes in their demographics. Again, with poverty increasing, it's increasing in theirs, but they're making adjustments within their schedules to meet the needs of those students as well.
We're doing that on our dime, I guess.
It is on the school district.
Yep.
Any other comments? Thank you, Ms. Dale.
Mhm.
All right, 8.4. Oh,
No, don't start over.
yeah. Title I. Hey, I'm reading fast as I can. Title I, Part D, Subpart 2, Local Programs for Neglected and Delinquent Florida Department of Education Project Application for 2018-2019, presented by, again, Ms. Amy Dell, Title I, Title IX Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And again, I don't want to belabor it, but just, we've outlined how important this is for our school district, and so I appreciate all of Ms. Dale's effort and the staff that she works with, because these are grants, if you will, that we have to apply for, and then we're dictated now by the state of how we can use those. And as you stated, it's not that we don't want to provide services to any student in need, even those middle school students in the past that we weren't labeling as Title I schools. We were still providing services, as Mr. Desson stated, through the school district's means and budget narrative. But it would be more beneficial if we just adequately received enough funding.
Ideally, yes. And I would state, since your previous question on Title I Part A, we did see a $40,000 decrease in the Title I Part D grant this year.
All right. 8.41. District Instructional Leadership and Faculty Development Grant Application presented by Mrs. Cindy Gates, Director 1, Principal Evaluation, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Again, just another, grant that we're applying for so we can provide training.
What we need to do, right?
Right. Thank you.
All right. 8.42, request for course adoptions for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Mrs. Melissa Bowell, Secondary Curriculum Specialist, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.43, request to advertise a public hearing for the adoption of 2018-2019 Code of Student Conduct, Elementary and Secondary, presented by Mr. Andy Johnson, Specialist, Student Intervention Services, Safe Schools, Athletics and Discipline, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Finally, Section 9. Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations 9.1, Deferred Retirement Option Program Drop, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Information only. 9.2, Personnel Recommendations, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.3, Employment Separations, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.4, Employee Transfers, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.5, employee suspension, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.6, reinstatement reimbursement of sick leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, leave without pay, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.8, administrative, managerial, and professional technical personnel recommendations for school year 2018-2019, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. All right, moving on to discussion agenda. Section 11, construction program owners representatives business. Section 12, information technology seat management contract 12.1 CACI task order number 2-01404 for security camera system additions and DVR at Destin Elementary School, presented by Mr. Dustin Keith, Specialist Seat Management, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Mr. Attorney, your business, sir.
No report today.
Thank you, sir. Superintendent, you got some field trips, and you may have some other things too.
Yes, the Destin principal position was inadvertently left off the board agenda.
But that caused at least one concern.
Yes, yes, it did. We would like to add that as well to this agenda and present it on Monday. We waited late last night to make the calls. We wanted to make sure we were doing the right thing, so we'll be getting information to all of you very shortly.
All right, ma'am, very good, thank you. All right, so now moving on to, unless there's any comment about any of that. All right, moving on to board members' business. Mr. Destin, sir, I'll start with you.
I think I will have none this morning.
All right,
Chairman.
sir, very good. Ms. Thrush?
Ms. Jackson, I know it's a busy time of year, but I know we're in receipt of some grade information, some FSA scores, end of course exam scores, and I know every year Mr. Horton, or it might be Mr. Peterson, who does his magic and does a great job of showing cohort, because that's really what we're looking for, to try to see those cohort improvements and areas of strengths, and always, as we've stated before, no organization is perfect in areas that we're looking to improve on or make adjustments with. So are we planning on doing that at the next board meeting?
At the next board meeting, we should have everything. I'm still getting stuff from Joe Peterson. Very detailed reporting, down to the principal, down to the teacher. It's excellent reporting, down to the skill. We know the skills in a school by a teacher that were not proficient. And so we're working on that, and I know I keep asking for things from Mr. Horton and Mr. Peterson.
Yes, ma'am. He's working at that and getting that information out to principals. I just want to make sure one thing was not misinterpreted. School grades are not out at this point in time.
I said grades, and you're
so
correct. I meant scores.
We've seen some results out. We compile it and get it over to Ms. Jackson, the curriculum department, to kind of take a look at it. But yes, ma'am, I think at the next meeting that'll be some updates from Mr. Chambers and myself.
While you're up there, for parents or guardians, as far as getting information about end of course exam scores or FSA grades, that isn't available yet, or is it available yet on the Grades Online
Individual
program?
reports come in from the state, and so those will be getting out to the schools as well.
Okay.
And then all that information will be available through the parent portal at some point in the future.
Okay.
I'll get you an exact date on that Monday.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. I'm not going to ask if you've run any preliminary calculations.
I'm not going to answer.
I remember we used to do that. All right, anything else, Mr. Bryant?
I would just like go back to agenda item 8.4 real quick, Ms. Jackson. I didn't get a chance to ask, but could you provide us a copy of the form that has to be filled out at the school? Maybe that would be that the bus trip that they have to fill to get on the bus.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, if we could maybe have a copy of that.
Okay.
just for ours. And real quick, I know it's the budget season and all, and I just want to thank Ms. Gowan and her team and everybody else within the school district who's trying to hurry up to get those numbers in so she can work her magic. But, you know, it's always great to see a smile on her face, and we'll get through this budget process. But I just wanted to say thank you to her team and everybody else out there that's working hard to get this budget through. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, board members, under my business, I'm going to cover the public hearings. Here we go. 16.1, public hearing for the adoption of a new job description for Specialist Safe Schools, presented by Ms. Lindsay Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 16.2, public hearing for adoption of a new job description for Program Director, Human Resources, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 16.3, public hearing for adoption of a new school board policy 03-20 physical education program, presented by Mr. Jeff Palmer, Elementary Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Public hearing for adoption of revised school board policy 06-08 complaints relating to employees, presented by Mrs. Lindsay Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Board members, any other business?
Just
Yes,
a
sir,
correction,
Mr.
Ms.
Bryant?
Jackson, it was 8.6.
Yeah, I
Okay.
got it.
All right.
Thank you.
I didn't have my readers all the way on.
All right, Superintendent, you got anything else?
No, sir?
Mr. Attorney?
No, sir.
Staff? We're adjourned.
Rita.
2 hours.
Not bad, really, considering the
As
length.
long as it was. I didn't add up how many pages. Start adding all those attachments together. All right.